So we're running a few minutes late, but we talked of disruptions and technology and all of it. But this disruption is much more pervasive than we think it really is. It's into politics, it's into sports, and it's into entertainment. So where do I point? The new face of the Republican Party is completely disrupted. So there's a new standard of whether you're a Republican or not a Republican is measured by the size of your hand and how big it is, if you know what I mean. Sports is getting disrupted. Her defenders say Sharapova has always been a woman of substance for many, many years. And we are hearing many more controversies regarding Sharapova. And of course, near and dear to her heart, the Oscars almost got disrupted. But coming back to what Pari talked about and Frank, it's all about technology and disruption. And I will borrow this slide back from Pari. And while we talk about what's going on, the session is titled Davids and Goliaths. So there's so many Davids and so many Goliaths, and how do we really work together? It's not about just the unicorns or the decacorns. There are 45,000 such companies in the US. But if you look at even the decacorns, 65 of those companies are in the Bay Area. So while we talked about what's happening globally, I thought it would be right to have Vivek Paul, who's seen this over the last few years, different roles that he has done in Silicon Valley to help us understand this change. So I welcome Vivek on stage. And Vivek, please join me. And we've got the chairs together, so you can sit. And Vivek has been, he needs no introduction, but he's been Business Week and Time Manager of the Year 2003, 2004, and recognized as the top 50 managers by Barron's. So welcome, Vivek. So
thank you.
Before you even get a chance to sit down, Vivek, you've been at the top. You've been at the boards, and you believe in the top-down approach. So what's really going on in the boardroom with the CEOs? How worried are they? What are they doing about this?
So let me give a context that's slightly on the other side, which is what does it feel like on the board side to view all of these conversations we had, rapidly changing technologies, tsunamis. And I think one of the things that's really changed is what you think about as senior management. So, there was a question earlier, which is, how do you get CTOs into the conversation? And I have to say that the CTO is the conversation, not in the sense of an individual that has that title, but really in terms of the kind of leaders you promote, the kind of leaders that you put in place inside an organization. I had the privilege to chair the CEO search committee at Electronic Arts, which is the largest video game company. And, you classically, I guess, if you looked at what the search firms were telling you was, there's all these marketing people who are the superb marketing people. There are all these finance guys who can really know how to make a buck. But ultimately, I chose, and the board chose, an individual who understood product. And that's because every single company, and I really don't care what industry you're in, but every single company is one product cycle mishap from falling off forever. And so I think that the notion that you have to understand the product is really critical. Back in the day, I used to work at GE, and I remember we had this term called the bungee boss. And the bungee boss, GE would throw in the CEO of a business unit. He would go in, or she would go in 3 or 4 years, or maybe even less than that, 2 years, and be out. And the idea was that it doesn't matter what business, what matters is your toolkit and your success that you can bring to it. Well, it matters now. I think GE's changed, and I certainly look at, from the business side, how you've got to make sure people who understand product are the ones who get ahead. So with that in mind, to answer your question specifically, we've seen the gamut in terms of how technology presentations get made, from the really silly, sort of 5 or 6 years ago, the only time the CIO came to the board saying, I now have implemented Oracle, N+1 or SAP N+1, and then parroted out the sales pitch. From there, I think we went to, and that was frankly utterly useless. And that was the time when there was a lot of articles around, is the investment in all this technology really creating the productivity? I think since then we've gone to really exciting things, and we covered a lot of those. But I think one of the ones that maybe we did not mention that I'd just like to throw out there is forward-looking metrics. So as a board, oh boy, you got tired of looking at your quarterly financials cut and dissected in so many different ways. But that's all backward looking. That's all yesterday's news. And I think that the ability, particularly with what we have today in terms of the vast amount of telemetry inside an organization, you now have the ability to say, I'll read the financials before I come to the board meeting. What I really want to talk about is customer engagement metrics. What I really want to talk about is repeat revenue. What I really want to talk about is the mix of customers that we're getting. So I think that this forward-looking metrics, I think, has been something that has been really important. I say the next thing is being able to create customer platforms. So once again, the notion that you have a one-to-one relationship with a customer, but that the next customer relationship is exactly identical, but completely independent, has actually been blown away. And so, as a board member, you look at how do we create customer networks? How do we create abilities for customers to help themselves, customers to look into our own organization, so having access to our enterprise systems, and how do we create closed systems that create a network that is much harder to break? And so, for example, in electronic arts, which is the example I started with, I would say that the idea that you can create a platform where gamers connect with gamers instead of having to go through intermediaries. So I can keep going. I don't want to be too long-winded, but I think that the world as a board member has changed in many ways.
And we are seeing the same thing too. The technology office and the business are working more and more close together. It's not the IT, but it's just the convergence between technology and business. And I go to my second question. Vivek, you've worked with large end user organizations. You worked with global service providers. You worked with private equity. You've run and built a startup of your own, and now you're an entrepreneur program you're taking at Stanford University. So you've just seen, you've rolled with the times, so to speak. How has Silicon Valley changed? How have the startups, how has it evolved over time?
So I have to say that Silicon Valley is also struggling with the wealth inequality that we're seeing in the rest of the world. So in some sense, what you're seeing is that at the lower level, capital is becoming commoditized. So, if you're a startup and you just want to look for some seed funding, you can go to Indiegogo or Kickstarter. And on the other side, the sort of high-value venture funds continue to be super successful. So I think that, first of all, in terms of the nature of the venture fund, the middle class is gone, if you will. So what you're seeing is that the venture funds that were marginally successful are, in fact, not existent anymore. And even at the kind of well-known brand name venture funds, really, the role that they play more than anything else is they are the best hawkers of your company at the highest price. Some, really ridiculous valuations have only happened with these top venture funds. But besides the venture industry itself, I think that one of the things that's really changing is the nature of Silicon Valley by industry. So the center of fintech technology used to be New York. It is now this area, the Bay Area. It is amazing when we look at the number of fintech companies here. Automotive, what we're looking at is the center for automotive innovation is not in Detroit. It's not anywhere else but right here in Silicon Valley. If you look at heartland manufacturing, what we're seeing now is that the future of sensors, intelligence, and platforms. I hate to use the word Internet of Things because it's just such a buzzword, but the whole manufacturing in heartland transformation is happening here. So what has happened is that Silicon Valley really, instead of us having Silicon Valleys everywhere in the world, actually continues to be this black hole sucking in industry after industry and the innovation around it.
While I go to my next question, if there are any questions, just pick up your hand and we have microphones and we'll take a couple of questions while I go. So here's the million-dollar question. I was listening to NPR the other day while driving, and there was this whole discussion on, has Silicon Valley got ahead of its times? And our valuations, our companies overvalued. So do you think we are in for another bubble? And how is it going to be different? If so, how is it going to be different from the one in 1999?
It's interesting. I had dinner a couple of nights ago with a friend of mine who was the founder and CEO of what was a unicorn. And he said, one of the things he said, I had to go through a layoff, we had to resize the company. And he goes, so I said, how's the world different? He goes, you say to yourself, I'm no longer a unicorn, get over it. And so I think that, he's not looking at shutting down the company. He's not looking at, having a different strategy or a difference in trajectory. I think that he is recognizing that perhaps the, rapid expansion well ahead was perhaps too much, and maybe I just need to gate it a little bit more. But the business is going to be around. He's going to be continuing to do exactly what he was doing. So I think that the way to think about these unicorns is to separate valuation from substance. And I think that valuations have been really, you might call inflated, you might say overstated, but it's a matter of time. A bad investment you can also term as a long-term investment. So so eventually these companies will grow into it. But I think that what you're seeing here is that there is substance to virtually all of these companies. I think that the private market was tolerating valuations that were substantially ahead. I think a lot of these companies are going to have to struggle, including my friend's company, at raising their next round of capital because they might have to do a down round, and down rounds are really demoralizing for the employees. Investors don't sometimes allow it, and there might be a couple of companies that may actually trip over their own underwear as they think about doing the next raise. But other than that, I feel like if you look at the list of companies, they're onto something. And so if you separate substance from valuation, I feel like I'm not ready to call this one a bubble yet.
Good. So if I can't see if there are any questions, please let me know. But if you look at what Pari talked about and what Frank talked about, and why is today different from other disruptions, and what I call it's the perfect storm. It's the perfect storm, the convergence of hardware, network, and the software. They've all converged, and there is this proliferation of services and products which are sold as services. So we have companies like Nest, Roku, GoPro, Venmo, and Oculus, and all these organizations. As you think about it, Vivek, all these hundreds of startups, what are some examples of either startups or the Davids or the Goliaths that, in your experience, that have successfully managed to forge and build a relationship, and maybe one or two examples of one that have not?
So I'm going to first go on my soapbox here, which is that one thing that I am just absolutely super excited about is this area of data, sensing and gathering, and for want of a better word, artificial intelligence. I think that the ability that we have today of really expanding what data we collect, being able to make sense of it, and being able to actually have the data itself write its own software so that you can get intelligence out of the data that you've got out there, I think is going to be a game changer. And so I think that, your question really is around which companies have succeeded or failed. And frankly, we've heard so many examples today that I could go through a list as well. I mean, I saw that Authentize is one of the companies you guys have had on the chart, and they're a great company, but there's others as well. But I think that the important thing here really is, if there is a go west young man or young lady or plastics word that I can leave with this gang here, it really is around this notion of how do you add as much data as you can, and how do you add the right code or the right algorithms that can allow that data to in fact figure out for itself how to learn. And I mean, just to give you another example of that, I was talking to these guys at this company called Prism Skylab. They analyze feeds from security cameras. Now, this is information that gets thrown away, right? I mean, this is just simply information that's on a short loop, and you throw it away. These guys can analyze that information and look at it and be able to tell you merchandising information, customer intent information, et cetera. And retailers love it. Other industries are also taking a look at it. You look at multispectral imaging in the agricultural world, where they're able to now collect data on multiple frequencies of light, and now have the ability to really write code that understands what all that means in terms of health of crop and when to go after it. And so there's one thing that I would say right now, it really would be, expand the data that you collect, and unleash the intelligence. And in this whole area of artificial intelligence, people ask, when will computers begin to exceed humans? And that's just not a good question, because it's kind of like asking, is a submarine better at the front call or the backstroke? The way that artificial intelligence will work, the way that this will lay itself out, if you've got the right thoughts, will be completely different, and we as humans will not understand how that intelligence works. But we will be able to get the tools in place to do that. And the good news is that particularly in this space, there are now companies out there that are building those tools. So had to get on my soapbox.
No, absolutely. And the way we see it, and we term it as from sense to sensing. And that really captures what you just talked about. And we get to our last question is, for the audience here, do you have any recommendations for both either the Davids or the Goliaths? Do you have any two recommendations that you would tell them to make all this very successful?
So as I think somebody said, or maybe you said earlier, Ian, that it's not clear that the Davids are differentiated from the Goliaths, because size at one level is important but not terribly relevant. I think that, and I already gave some of my advice as I got on that soapbox, but I think that at an individual level, this is absolutely a great time to make a difference. And the reason I say that is, as you think about, whether you're on the technology side, whether you're on the product side, or whether even you're on the people side, the fact that you can create collaborations tighter and better than you always could, the fact that you can create, as a result of that, platforms that either allow your business to take a leap against other competitors who may not build out the right platforms, or whether it's the ability to be able to get closer to your customers, the ability to be able to get vastly more amounts of data and be able to analyze it in ways that we have not even conceived of. I think that all of those means that every single one of us in this room right now is actually empowered to make a difference. So I really believe that, it's not about David or Goliath. It really is about how each one of us in what we do today can transform the company, because we are incredibly empowered with the current technology. So the question really was, what's the quality of leaders that you look for? And I think that I talked already about the fact that leaders have got to be able to understand their products. And I'm talking about a business unit leader. I'm not talking about, they're functional leaders, like maybe finance or HR, whatever. But if you're looking for a business leader, first and foremost, if they don't come from that product side, it is really a hard slog to understand what are the things they can do. The second is that the leader has the recognition that not only am I incredibly important and the decisions that I make are incredibly important, I am also, most of the time, the most irrelevant person in the room. Because this is something where I really have to let go, where whether it's my team, whether it's my expanded ecosystem, whether it's my sensors and intelligence coming back to me, whether it's my forward-looking reporting that directs me rather than my sitting there going, we will go this way. Instead, I look at the data and I go, it's pretty obvious, we should go this way. So I think that it is that combination where a leader doesn't feel like they have either the ego or the need to prove themselves to be the smartest person in the room that creates no space for anybody else, as much as the leader who can really listen, accept, integrate, and act.
Can we get the mic there, please? So we have 1 more minute, so 1 more question.
Thank you. So I just had a kid who graduated from college, and I would be curious, if you just graduated from college, you're 22 years old, where would you go, and what would be your value proposition to that company you're looking to go with?
So I think that's a harder question to answer without understanding the individual's expertise or background, whatever they got. Right. So if I was 20, I was an engineer and I could go in one particular direction. If they're in, so as a result, the reason I'm saying this is that my answer may be a little bit higher level and more abstracted. I think that the idea really here would be if they can get into a role where they work for one of these companies that is emerging I'm very startup biased, so I would say, in a startup, maybe not in the A round stage, maybe a startup that's in like the C round stage, which is there is some level of stability, there is some level of consistency in what they do, there's some level of being able to get some training. But if I was to tell my son what he ought to do when he graduates, or if he was graduating at this time, it would really be go find an industry that you think you might be interested in, go look for a product company or a technology company in that space, and see if you can get a break in. And it's hard right now. I can tell you that I have kids who've graduated from college, and right now, it is really hard for young kids, unless they have a vocational training, to get the opportunities that many of us had as we were graduating. So it is a question I take very seriously because it is much harder now than it was earlier. But if there was a direction that they could choose, that's a direction I would suggest to them.
Thank you.
Good. We are out of time, so we'll want to get back on course. Vivek is around, and thank you very much,
All right.
Vivek.